everybody else ready?
Okay, so I'm Kathleen.
And my name is E.
And we also worked at the VA Garden, but mostly on the Healthy Food Initiative. So a little bit about the background of and motivation of why we're working on this. By 2050, the UN projects that 2/3 of the world population is going to live in urban cities, which makes urban gardens a really urgent need. And we also have a rural shrinking labor force, which is important because currently 80% of the food that cities use comes from rural areas and farms. So by building urban gardens, that would solve and also help minimize that carbon footprint and be more sustainable. And lastly, there's a huge disparity in access to healthy food among Americans, and that is especially pertinent to veterans because there was a study on veterans at the VA hospital specifically, and it found that about 25% report food insecurity, but that 25% is already a low estimate because it's only pertinent to veterans who go to the VA hospital, but there are many that do not go to the VA hospital and don't have access. So one of the specific aims for our project was to utilize the space that's already fertile and already being used, those 15 garden beds that the previous group talked about, and create this planting schedule and guide. We think the key factors to actually maintaining the space and optimizing the yield of plants that are grown in this space are things like using square foot gardening, which is currently not being used. We're doing row style gardening, or they're using row style gardening, using plants for natural pest control, using companion planting, which I'll talk about a little more after this slide, and using drought tolerant plants, especially because we're in Southern California and always in drought, and want to minimize the water usage. The great thing about these gardens is that they already have drip irrigation established in them, so that allows for a lot more freedom to grow different kinds of plants and different varieties. So a little bit about companion planting. We talked to Mark Biedlingmeyer, who works here at the J&B Seminole Healthy Campus Initiative Community Garden at UCLA. So he's really knowledgeable about gardening, specifically in raised elevated beds. So here, this is a picture taken at the garden here at UCLA, where he used companion planting, and square foot gardening. You can see the lines here, or maybe the lines here that separate every square footage. And with companion planting, it has several benefits. You can see here they're growing kale, different types of kale with chili. The benefits are that it helps to maintain soil moisture. If you have vining plants that provide shade for different plants, especially in the VA garden because it's under a very sunny area without a lot of shade. It also, with the diversity of plants, helps to minimize pests and helps to slow the spread of disease. And also helps to attract different kinds of pollinators. So a key thing to actually maintaining this garden and being rigorous about it is maybe making something like a planting schedule that the Watts Garden also talked about a little bit. This is taken from a UC Davis, or this was made by UC Davis for Sacramento specifically. But the great thing again about Southern California is that we're very mild and there's very little frost. So a lot of things can be grown annually and perennially here. So letting people, since there's going to be high turnover amongst the people working at the garden, making sure that, okay, we're in June, what should we be planting? What should we start to plant indoors to transplant later into the garden beds? What should we be harvesting? And what should continue to be grown? And also adding in what beds they should be put in, because there are these 15 beds and we want to incorporate companion planting to optimize the yield.
So other than the raised beds that already fertilized, we have other pieces of land that's available for growing fruit. However, this piece of land, based on the soil testing group's result, it's the only area that we can produce food on it. So we proposed two ways for two types of planting on this about 1 acre of land. So we can grow some fruit trees which can increase the variety of the types of the food we can provide for the veterans. However, it will take relatively a longer process. The other one is that we can apply our companion planting strategy here. So a good example will be the three sisters, corn, beans, and the squash. So the corn stalk will help the beans to climb up, and the beans will return nitrogen back into the soil. And the squash will help to maintain this area shaded.
So another way, and the design team talked about this with the beekeeping, that we thought, since the soil testing team found that other areas of the land aren't fertile for planting and actually growing edible foods, we thought we could, a key part of our project was to engage veterans, and we thought we could utilize this space to engage veterans by using something called phytoremediation and planting using seasonal fun like harvesting pumpkins during Halloween, which VA Garden has already done before, that aren't going to be eaten, or planting sunflowers like in the summer to create a field that could help take up the high zinc levels and the high lead levels that have been found in these soils to make them long-term more fertile for actual edible plant growth in the future. So here's a little graph about what kinds of how plants actually do the phytoremediation. And so the third part of our project was to try and propose and develop a viable compost system that the VA Garden can implement. When we worked at the VA Garden, our first week of this class, we were clearing out a lot of debris, and that's a lot of carbon source that's being thrown out into the waste. So we thought we could utilize that in our own compost system. And then Bonnie had this great idea while we were presenting at the Eat Well initiative to utilize food scraps and food waste, because there's not many green scraps available on the VA Garden itself, as nitrogen sources, and that could help reduce food waste both at UCLA and at the VA hospital. And the benefits of composting, as has been said before, it minimizes water loss in the garden beds. Again, it helps reduce food waste, and it's a way it could be a task for veteran engagement and showing knowledge of the place.
So we have all these great ideas, and we want to see what we have right now and how we're going to incorporate all the findings we had into the VA Garden. So right now we have those different plants, different vegetables planted in the raised beds. However, there were one type of vegetable per raised beds, if I'm not thinking wrong, and the density for the plants are very loose. So actually, if it's, for example, for spinach, they can grow up to 9 crops per unit, which is per square foot, so that we can maximize the production. Also, we can imply that we can use the strategy of companion plants in this raised beds to optimize the different types of food production as well as the unit yield. Right now, we're using the purchase the soil to fertilize the beds, but we can also use some compost that once we have the composting set up. So looking to this project, how it will help with the food insecurity as well as some other problems the veterans may suffer. The most direct way it will help with food insecurity is that we're producing different types of veggies and fruits in this garden, so we can distribute their food, give them access to the healthy food. But in addition, I think it's very important that the gardening itself has been proven to be a good strategy to help them maintain the mental healthiness. So it's a good way for them to actually relieve their pressure and help them enjoy the process of gardening, as well as it's a good way for them to incorporate with each other, such as the volunteers and the whole community, and learn how to cooperate each other in this process. So to engage the veterans into this gardening, we proposed the 4 different ways. Right now, the first method, what we have right now is the volunteer day. So I think it's for every Friday and Saturday that the volunteers will have the opportunity to work with the volunteers from either the community or majorly from the UCLA. So I think it's a great opportunity for them to get to know each other, and the veterans will get enlightened by the volunteers. Also, we can provide temporarily paid jobs such as keeping the garden, and as the other group said, we can have the beekeepers. Also, we need somebody to help us fix the greenhouse so that we have a more space for veterans and people around this community to gather around. Also, they can learn many skills, including gardening, beekeeping, and cooking in this process. The other two ways, including family activities. So if we remember, Kathleen mentioned that we have the seasonal fun. So every important festival, we can have like a party or like something gathered around for the families, for the veterans' families. It's also important to attract not only the veterans but also their children, especially. Also, we can offer some classes for the veterans to build up their resume, so they can learn not only gardening, but also we can provide such as cooking classes that they know not only to harvest what they're planting, as well as how to process their food. Based on that, I think we have the overall overview of how to get them engaged and involved in the gardening. So as like a summary or an outcome of our project, we would like to create like a guidance for the visitors, veterans, more importantly for the volunteers or workers who is gonna keep going with this project. So we want to make this handbook including a quick introduction about the veterans garden, as well as the food insecurity problems the veterans are currently suffering from. And we want to provide different resources for the veterans. So we have a list of, for example, job opportunities or dates of events or cooking classes available. So they have a refer when they come into the garden. Most importantly, that we want to put our planting schedule into this handbook so that people know what to plant and when to plant based on season, weather, and the requirement of water. So that's our project.